"This house is already mine, you old fool. My son kicked me out and sold the family home for $1.5 million. The big surprise for him was discovering that, before he sold it, I had sold the land to a construction company, and the house was, the words still echo in my mind, sharp and cruel like shards of glass. This house is already mine, you old fool." My own son, Ricardo, his face contorted with a mixture of greed and something akin to disgust, as if I were nothing more than a troublesome piece of furniture he was eager to discard. He had always been a difficult child, demanding and entitled, but I never imagined he would stoop this low. This house, it wasn't just bricks and mortar. It held a lifetime of memories, the laughter of children, the warmth of family gatherings, the quiet comfort of shared evenings with my late wife, Elena. We had poured our hearts and souls into this place, every corner whispering tales of our life together. And now my own flesh and blood was throwing me out onto the street, all for a fistful of reais. The preceding months had been a slow descent into this nightmare. Elena's passing 2 years prior had left a void that nothing seemed to fill. Ricardo and his wife, Sophia, had started visiting more frequently, their initial concern gradually morphing into thinly veiled inquiries about the house, about my finances. They spoke of needing more space for their growing family, of the upkeep becoming too much for me. At the time, I saw it as concern, albeit clumsy. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, their every word and gesture reeked of avarice. The pressure intensified. Sophia, with her saccharine smile and eyes that always seemed to be calculating angles, would constantly point out flaws in the house. A cracked tile here, a patch of damp there, subtly devaluing the place in my own mind. Ricardo, never one for subtlety, became more direct. He started suggesting I move into a smaller apartment somewhere more suitable for someone your age, always with the underlying implication that the house would then be his to do with as he pleased. I resisted, of course. This house was my sanctuary, the last tangible link to Elena, but their persistence was relentless. They would arrive unannounced, disrupting my quiet routines, filling the house with their noisy children and their constant chatter about renovations and potential resale value. The emotional toll was immense. I felt like an unwelcome guest in my own home, my opinions and feelings disregarded. Then came the day Ricardo announced he had a buyer. He presented the offer as a done deal, his eyes gleaming with triumph. $1.5 million, a substantial sum, he'd said. Enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my days in a nice little place. The condescension in his voice was a physical blow. He hadn't even discussed it with me. Hadn't considered my feelings. It was a fait accompli. The argument that followed was brutal. I pleaded with him, reminded him of the years of love and sacrifice that had built this home. He brushed my words aside, accusing me of being sentimental and unrealistic. Sophia chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy, suggesting I was being selfish by standing in the way of their family's happiness. It was then, as Ricardo's hand landed on my back, pushing me towards the door, his voice laced with that dismissive old fool remark, that something inside me snapped. The years of passive endurance, the hope that they would eventually see reason, shattered. In that moment of raw humiliation, a cold, hard resolve took root. They wanted to play games? Fine. I would play their game, but by my own rules. As I stood on the sidewalk watching Ricardo and Sophia congratulate themselves inside the house that was no longer truly theirs, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but beneath it a plan began to form. They thought they had won. They thought they had outsmarted the old man. They were about to learn a very different lesson. They had forgotten one crucial detail, something they had always overlooked in their rush for immediate gain. I wasn't as foolish as they believed. This land, this precious piece of earth upon which our home stood, it was still mine, and I had a few calls to make. My initial days after being evicted were deliberately low-key. I moved into a small, unassuming hotel in a part of the city Ricardo and Sophia rarely visited. It was important for them to believe their plan had worked flawlessly, that I had simply faded away, a minor inconvenience dealt with. I kept my phone conversations brief and vague whenever they called, feigning a weariness that played into their preconceived notions of my age and helplessness. Meanwhile, my wheels were turning. Years ago, before Elena fell ill and our focus shifted entirely to her care, I had dabbled in property investment. I had a knack for spotting potential, for understanding the intricacies of land development. Our plot had always held a particular appeal to me. Situated close enough to the city center for convenience but with ample space, and a certain tranquility that was becoming increasingly rare. Over the years, I had received several unsolicited offers from developers, all of which I had politely declined. Now those old contacts became invaluable. Under the guise of needing to sort out my affairs, I began meeting with these developers. I presented them with the original land deed, the one Ricardo had so carelessly overlooked in his haste to seize the house itself. The surprise on their faces when they realized the potential was palpable. The location, the size of the plot. It was a prime piece of real estate ripe for a high-density residential project. Negotiations were swift and surprisingly straightforward. The developers were eager to secure the land, and I, with nothing left to lose, drove a hard bargain. I insisted on a quick sale, a lump sum payment that would ensure my financial independence, and most importantly, a clause that stipulated the commencement of construction within a specific time frame. This last point was crucial to my plan. Throughout this process, I maintained a facade of normalcy with Ricardo and Sophia. I would occasionally accept their strained invitations for lunch, listening patiently to their excited talk about the renovations they were planning for their house. Sophia even showed me fabric swatches for new curtains, her eyes sparkling with acquisitive delight. I would nod and smile, offering vague compliments, all the while knowing their dreams were built on a foundation of sand. The day the land sale was finalized, a quiet satisfaction settled within me. The sum I received was significantly more than what Ricardo had gotten for just the house. It was a testament to the inherent value they had so carelessly dismissed. But the money itself wasn't the primary motivator. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing them the depth of their mistake. The real turning point came a few weeks later. I received a call from Ricardo, his voice laced with confusion and a hint of panic. He had gone to the local authorities to finalize some paperwork related to the house sale, only to be informed of a rather significant impediment. The land, he was told, had been sold to a construction company, and permits for a multi-story building were already in progress. I feigned ignorance when he confronted me, my expression carefully crafted to convey bewildered concern. Sold, but the house is right there, I stammered, playing the part of the confused old man to perfection. Ricardo's frustration was palpable. He sputtered and raged, accusing me of senility, of not knowing what I was doing. Sophia, her usual composure cracking, joined in the tirade, her voice shrill with disbelief. "How could you do this, Father?" Ricardo bellowed over the phone. "That money was supposed to be for your care. And what about the sale of the house? It's all going to fall through. You seemed quite eager to take care of that by throwing me out, Ricardo. As for the house, well, a house without land is just a structure, wouldn't you agree?" In that silence, I knew they were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. They had been so focused on the immediate gratification of selling the house, on the quick profit, that they had completely overlooked the fundamental truth. The land was the foundation, both literally and figuratively, and that foundation was no longer theirs to control. The shockwave of their realization was almost palpable, a silent scream of disbelief echoing through the phone line. Their arrogance had blinded them, and now they were about to face the consequences. The following weeks were a chaotic whirlwind for Ricardo and Sophia. The buyer of the house, understandably furious, threatened legal action. The $1.5 million they had so eagerly pocketed was now tied up in potential lawsuits and the inevitable unraveling of their ill-conceived scheme. Their phone calls to me became more frequent, their tone shifting from anger and accusation to desperate pleas for help. They begged me to intervene, to explain, to somehow undo what had been done. I listened to their lamentations with a detached sense of calm. There was no satisfaction in their suffering, only a quiet acknowledgement that they were reaping what they had sown. I explained, calmly and patiently, that the sale of the land was a separate matter, a decision I had made independently. I made no mention of their earlier disrespect or their eagerness to be rid of me. I simply stated that I had secured my future, and their financial affairs were no longer my concern. The construction company moved quickly. Within a few months, heavy machinery arrived on the site. The familiar sounds of construction, the rumble of trucks, the clang of metal, the insistent beeping of reversing vehicles, filled the air. Ricardo and Sophia watched in dismay as the house they had so eagerly sold became an increasingly isolated structure, surrounded by the burgeoning framework of a multi-story building. The reality of their situation began to sink in. They had sold a house that was rapidly becoming worthless, perched precariously on land that belonged to someone else. The legal battles dragged on as expected. The buyers sued Ricardo for misrepresentation, And Ricardo, in turn, desperately tried to find a legal loophole to challenge the land sale. But the contracts were airtight, my intentions clear. The law was on my side. Eventually, the buyer won their case, forcing Ricardo and Sophia to return the $1.5 million, leaving them with nothing but legal fees and the bitter taste of their failed endeavor. The poetic justice of it all was not lost on me. They had seen me as a burden, as an obstacle to their financial ambitions. They had tried to exploit my age and perceived vulnerability. In the end, their own greed and short-sightedness had been their undoing. They had focused on the immediate prize, blinded to the larger picture, and in doing so, they had lost everything. As the towering structure on my former land began to take shape, I found a quiet contentment in my new life. My small hotel room had been replaced by a comfortable apartment, purchased outright with the proceeds from the land sale. I had reconnected with old friends, rediscovered forgotten hobbies, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of genuine peace. The memories of Elena were still with me, cherished and comforting, no longer overshadowed by the bitterness of my son's betrayal. Occasionally, I would see Ricardo and Sophia in the city, their faces etched with worry and resentment. They would avoid my gaze, a silent acknowledgement of their shame. I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure. Their downfall was a consequence of their own actions, a stark reminder that greed and ingratitude ultimately lead to ruin. My story is not one of revenge, but of resilience. It is a testament to the fact that even in our twilight years we are not powerless. Wisdom, experience, and a clear understanding of one's own worth can be formidable weapons against those who seek to exploit us. And sometimes, the greatest justice is not served through anger or confrontation, but through a quiet, calculated act that reveals the true cost of their folly. The house may be gone, but the land, and more importantly my dignity, remain firmly mine. And that, I realized, was the only inheritance that truly mattered.